Imagine checking into a resort. You're on vacation, the views are beautiful, and the weather is perfect. But in your closet, there's a dead body. That's exactly what happened in Key Largo, Florida. Guests checked into the Amaray Dive Resort completely unaware that a woman's body had been stuffed inside the room's air conditioning closet. I'm Kennedi Walker, and I'll walk you through the details. For this story, we go to Key Largo, Florida, which is about an hour and a half away from Miami. The beautiful island, known for its coral reefs and clear water, recently became the scene of a tragic murder. According to the Monroe County Sheriff's Office, 43-year-old Nadyne Tillman was killed inside one of the rooms at the Amaray Dive Resort. Investigators say she was beaten to death and her body hidden in the closet by a man she had just met. That man is 33-year-old Dylan Lamb, a local kayak tour guide. According to an arrest report, Lamb told detectives he met Tillman through an escort service website, and the two met at the resort on the morning of April 5th. Lamb claimed he gave Tillman $200 for sex, but said she tried to leave without, quote, engaging in the agreed activity. That reportedly made him angry. Lamb told police he blocked the door to stop her from leaving. Then, according to the report, he says Tillman started hitting him, and in response, he hit her back. That blow, according to Lamb's confession, caused Tillman to fall and hit her head, and he panicked. Instead of calling for help or alerting hotel staff, he said he went into the bathroom to collect himself. When he returned, Tillman was reportedly unconscious. She wasn't breathing. He told police he freaked out. According to the report, Lamb then used towels and linens from the room to clean the scene, stuffed her body into the closet under the water heater, and packed the bloody towels, linens, and her belongings into trash bags. He allegedly left those in the room and checked out. The resort's assistant general manager later eventually told police during the investigation the housekeeping staff found those bags stained with what they described as substances consistent with blood, urine, and feces. But in the moment, no one called police. Instead, staff reportedly threw the bags into a dumpster and cleaned the room. Then they rented out the room to new guests. So that means people slept in that room not knowing that Nadyne Tillman's body was still hidden just feet away in the closet. Meanwhile, her family and friends grew concerned. She hadn't been heard from since Saturday. 3 days later, deputies from the Monroe County Sheriff's Office arrived at the resort, and they found Tillman's car parked outside. Only when they arrived, the general manager did mention some, quote, odd behavior from a previous guest, Dylan Lamb. She told deputies that on the day of the incident, Saturday, she knocked on Lamb's door, but he refused to open it. Instead, he spoke to her through the closed door. She also described the bloody linens and towels her staff had discovered, but by the time police arrived, the dumpster had already been emptied, which means the evidence was gone. Deputies searched the room where Lamb had stayed, now occupied by different guests, and found Tillman's body. Documents say she was lying in the closet, partially clothed and in fetal position. Detectives reported that she had visible signs of trauma, 2 black eyes, swollen lips, and facial injuries, all consistent with blunt force. So they began searching for Dylan Lamb. According to police, he was already on probation for a 2024 grand theft auto case. He was arrested at his job, which was less than a mile away from the resort. At the time of his arrest, detectives say he had Tillman's wallet in his pocket. Lamb was charged with homicide, kidnapping and false imprisonment, tampering with evidence, and procuring another for prosecution. I want to thank Upside for sponsoring today's Law&Crime YouTube takeover. Upside is a free app that gives you real cash back on gas, groceries, and restaurants. It's super easy to use. Just claim an offer in the app, pay as usual with your card, and get paid. And this is actually real cash back. You can use Upside at places like Shell, Exxon, 7-Eleven, and Chipotle. So find out how much you could earn. Click the link in the description to download Upside or scan the QR code on your screen and use our promo code LCTakeover to get an extra 25 cents back on every gallon on your first tank of gas. That's promo code LCTakeover for an extra 25 cents back on your first gallon of gas. And joining me to talk more about this is legal expert Alexis Rosenberg. Alexis, thank you so much for coming on today. Let's just dive straight in. Can you walk us through the charges Dylan Lamb is currently facing and just explain what they mean?
So he is facing a litany of charges. He's facing second-degree murder. He's facing kidnapping and false imprisonment. He's facing tampering with evidence, as well as he is facing procurement of a prostitute.
And just why would prosecutors add the charge procurement of prostitution in this case?
I had the same question because I felt that it wasn't necessarily needed. It's probably going to be dropped, as well as I think for protection of the victims, because she had young children, she had school age children, that I would probably, as a prosecutor, not have charged him with that just for public optics. But I think that they wanted to charge him with that to show that that was the reason that she was there, because information in the investigation had come out that of the timeline, and why she was actually in the room.
How many years is he facing?
Oh, he's facing a lot of years. So the second degree murder, remember, he potentially, that can also be lesser. Although second degree murder is a lesser charge compared to first degree murder, where they're saying that it wasn't premeditated. Basically, there was the heat of the moment. But he is facing potentially life imprisonment.
Could he potentially be looking at the death penalty?
No, we can't be looking at the death penalty because we don't have the premeditated, element that would require the death penalty. So the likelihood is that unless they upcharge him, because additional evidence comes out that we have that premeditated element, it's going to be the life in prison potentially. And he's confessed, so there's a high likelihood, unless that confession is thrown out, that he will be convicted.
Does the fact that Dylan Lamb has a record hurt him at all?
So when they look at sentencing, if he's ultimately convicted, because as we know, these are allegations that he's been charged with, he does have to be tried and convicted. But at sentencing, that is when that would come into play. If he had been, and we know he had ultimately, fairly recently, been convicted of the grand theft auto and was on probation for that. So that will play in at sentencing. They take that and all, priors, and we have the argument about mitigating factors and aggravating factors. All of that plays in at sentencing.
Could his alleged confession be thrown out or even challenged in court?
Well, there's a high likelihood that the confession is going to be challenged in court. The defense, if it goes to trial and he doesn't plea out. So if it goes to trial, the defense attorney is going to have to put up a defense. And one of the defenses that just kind of jumps out is, how was that confession taken? Was he given Miranda rights? What were the circumstances surrounding that confession? So I do think that there's going to be motion practice before we even get to trial to try to throw out that confession. Then once at trial, we're going to try to, make or get testimony to take away from the validity of that confession.
And how important is the fact that Lamb was reportedly found with the victim's wallet?
So that's very important. I mean, that puts her in the room, because what's kind of come out, that what's putting her, we have her car that was left at the hotel, but we need her, how did she get to the room? So obviously they found her body in the room. This has come out, but he wasn't in the room when they found the body. So for the timeline and putting him connecting with the victim, and being around the victim to have her personal effects on his person, which is interesting. You would think he would have gotten rid of that. Does put make that connection. So that is a very important connection between the two, and him being at the scene of crime and being around her and with her.
Does the fact that this case, allegedly involved an escort service complicate it at all, or it doesn't matter?
I don't think it complicates it, but obviously that it comes that you don't want the jury, even though they're not supposed to do this, to be like, oh, well, she was asking for it, meaning she's an escort, she put herself in that situation. And even an escort has a right not to be murdered. So, but we don't, that could play, if the defense could play upon that. And even though the jury's not supposed to do that, they could ultimately say that, that she deserved what happened to her because she was doing something illegal and she shouldn't have been in that room.
And based on the facts of the arrest report, do you think that it could rise to first degree murder, or do you just not see the intent there?
I think it's going to be a difficult situation unless there's something else that comes out, because it does sound like, based on what he said in the confession, was that she came there, that she was an escort, and that he paid her and she was leaving without providing services and he got angry. So that kind of does go along with that heat of the moment, and that it wasn't premeditated that he was going to kill her. Now, other things could come out in the investigation, that maybe it was that he lured her there with the intent to actually murder her. Then that would be premeditated.
If the victim hit him first, as he claims, could that open a self defense argument?
I mean, anything is possible with a good defense attorney. I just don't know if a jury is going to believe, based on what has come out, that her alleged injuries, allegedly, she had two black eyes, her lip was busted. So, even if she was the aggressor, if we wanted, or the initial aggressor, and we could get a jury to believe that, was it, what was the extent? Because I do not believe that there has been any evidence or anything that's come out that he really had any injuries on his body, or at least not anything substantial. So was he defending him, at what level? I think that's going to be a hard sell to a jury based on what they're saying her injuries were.
Is there a chance that, I don't know if I saw this in the arrest report, that the victim could have been sexually assaulted? We know that she was found, according to police, with, just a top on, but, nothing else on underneath, or nothing, no bottoms on or anything like that. Could he be charged with some type of sexual assault?
He could be, potentially. We could actually have something related to the corpse, depending on when, if the medical examiner comes back and says that that sexual assault was before or after. They can usually determine that a lot of times, especially considering they had access to her body fairly quickly. So there could be additional charges related to that. There could be a sexual assault charge or something of that nature related to that. But when I read that as well, my question was, did he end up sexually assaulting her, or was there something of that nature? Because you're right, why did she not have any clothes other than, basically, I think it was a crop top on at the time when they found the body? As well as, does it also conflict with his timeline? I mean, was she so scared about whatever was happening that she was trying to leave there even half dressed? Which gets back to what you said. Could there be additional charges, more or less, for raping her, because she was trying to leave because she was scared, or whatever it was? So I think as we get more information, then that is a possibility.
Is there any legal significance to the fact that the body was hidden rather than reported?
There's no real legal significance, obviously, when that's put before a jury and there's testimony as to where that the jury is going to look at all of the facts and testimony that's presented to them. So the fact that he didn't report it does kind of fly in the face of his defense, that she was trying to leave without providing services. He really wasn't trying to kill her. He just hit her, and he's saying, I believe, only once, and then she fell, and that's how she ultimately died. So I mean, it does play into, and then he allegedly freaked out. So it plays into that. If that happened, then why wouldn't you immediately try to seek medical treatment for her and say what happened? So it kind of all substantiates that, the intent factor, or the intent element of the crimes. Like, what would really happened, I guess.
Right. And something that I think is extremely mind boggling, the fact that guests stayed in the room with the victim's dead body. I just can't believe it. It's just so hard to even say those words out loud. How does the fact that the resort guests stayed in the room impact the investigation or trial?
So I don't think that impacts the investigation necessarily, or the trial, other than the fact, from an evidentiary standpoint, then the crime scene, has potentially been stampled on or, compromised, because now you already had other people in that scene. So from an evidence standpoint, it does. I mean, it is super creepy. I mean, I feel like every time I go into a hotel room now, I'm going to be checking everything, and I
Yeah,
hope they got
same
like a
here.
lot
Like
of
I just can't
comps
believe it.
and a discount on the room. That's a whole nother issue.
Well, okay, so let's just talk more about that. So, from the evidence standpoint, is the absence of physical evidence, like the missing linens or towels, a big blow to the prosecution?
I think that I wouldn't say a blow, but it is a problem that they're going to have to overcome. Thankfully, like you said, that we have this confession, and the confession is going to be able to come in at trial. So it is, because we don't have those sheets. Those sheets and that they said that had bodily fluids on them are gone. The police did try to retrieve them out of the dumpster. They had already been taken away. We also have other people that were in a crime scene, and so we're going to have their DNA and things related to that in that crime scene. So it's definitely not a crime scene. So from a forensic standpoint, it does make the case much more difficult for the prosecution. Like I said, it is a good thing that we do in this case have his confession. Also, we have her car there. We have the communication on her cell phone. So the prosecution does have other evidence that they could present to a jury.
Let's talk about the resort. Should the resort have contacted law enforcement after discovering the bloodied items?
So the short answer is yes. I'm not so sure if the housekeeping necessarily. I mean, for sure, they necessarily did not think that they were part of a crime scene. We would hope at that point, if they thought that, they would have definitely called the police. Somebody
Yeah,
from
but
an
I
employment.
understand that, but also like you got to think if you see, and I'm sure housekeeping staff they've
Yeah.
seen some crazy stuff, but just sheets full of blood, feces. I was reading the arrest report. I just it's hard for me to not see how that doesn't raise a red flag. What about you?
Oh, we didn't actually see pictures of it. So yes,
No.
I read that report as well. So maybe what we're visualizing that was seen, because I mean, you could have it and they were wrapped up and they're just kind of guessing what they are, and they're just thinking, something else took place in that hotel room. Other than, I don't think that they thought that necessarily at that point a crime took place. Um, but from an employment standpoint, I think that maybe some better training needs to be done to their housekeeping, that at least the housekeeping staff should have reported it to a supervisor, so that maybe somebody else could make a better judgment call on how to handle it. So maybe put some correction to policies and procedures there. But I mean, I don't want to second guess, because we're hearing what was in the bag, and now that housekeeping staff is knowing what had happened and kind of connecting the dots. It could have just been like, oh, it appeared there were some blood, and we're visualizing they're soaked in blood, and we're looking at a bag full of red sheets, opposed to something different. Because remember, she was, the allegation that she was hit over the head. So the extent of blood, although your head does bleed substantially more than other parts of your body, may not be as to the extent that we're visualizing it as we're reading that report.
That's true. That's true. Well, answer this. Could the hotel face civil liability in this case potentially?
So, that's a very good question. I guess you're referring to, there's two parts. There's the civil liability related to the victim, and then there's the civil liability related potentially to the individuals that stayed in this room with the dead body. So I do think that you could potentially, but it would kind of be difficult, but it's probably going to be made, that the victim's family could say that they were negligent in how they handled it, and maybe she could have still been alive when they came to the door. There's an allegation that they had come to the door, they were banging on the door of the hotel, and he was refusing to let them in, because they ended up bringing that as suspicious activity to the alert of the police during the investigation. So were they negligent, and was she still alive? So there's definitely probably going to be a claim by the victim's family. Now, related to the individuals that stayed there, they didn't know the body was there. So let's say they would have found the body, then we could have maybe had some, emotional distress or something of that nature. But since they didn't know, that may be a more difficult case from a civil standpoint, because what were their damages? They didn't see the body. Yeah, they were in there. It was after the fact. That's why I said, but they definitely should, comp the room and maybe give them some vouchers. I doubt they ever want to stay there again. I wouldn't, but
Yeah, I
they
know.
should
If
definitely.
I
But
was them, I would need like a year free or something. That's traumatizing just to
yeah.
just think about that, And also it's like,
Mhm.
did they smell anything? There's just so many questions that come from that for those people that were in that room. But speaking just more about the civil liability, could the victim's family potentially, because from what I'm reading from the arrest report, it appears that the housekeeping staff did bring it to her supervisor saying, hey, there's blood on these linens, there's blood here, there's blood there, what should we do? And it appears that the supervisor was the one that told the staff to throw it out. Knowing this information, seeing it in the police report, could the victim's family also have a claim with that, saying that, hey, if they would have called the police when they saw it, potentially, their mom would still be alive? Or do they not have a case there?
So it's my understanding from the police reports and what has come out that by the time housekeeping found the sheets, she had already passed. So the real question when I was reading it is, when they were at the door on Saturday and they were banging on the door and he wouldn't let them in, was she still alive? I definitely think that that would be the stronger argument, that if that, and as well as they informed the police when they did that there was this suspicious activity and told them about this incident. So it did raise to a level the exchange that did make them pause, because they were labeling it allegedly as suspicious activity to the police later. So I think that's the real question. Could they have potentially, if they had acted correctly and said, no, we have to have access, or this person is acting suspiciously, called the police at that point? Yeah, there's no doubt, with depending on what the linens look like, that they probably, if she's bringing it to the attention and there's a situation that maybe they should have had the police come, or maybe even put it aside or something of that nature, that definitely should have been handled. But I think that she was already deceased. It's pretty clear that the timeline, that she was deceased by the time he had left the room, I think on Sunday.
Now that's civil liability. Could the hotel staff or management potentially be considered negligent under Florida law?
Well, that is civil. Negligence is would be under Florida because it occurred in Florida, and negligence
Gotcha.
is the civil law. So I think the question you might be asking is, could they be held somehow criminally
Yes.
responsible for their actions? I'm not really saying that, because unless it comes out that somehow that the hotel like intentionally was trying to conceal it, or was part of the scheme to hide that the body was there, which none of that's come out. It just seems like they didn't know how to handle the situation and inappropriately handled the situation. So I don't think there's going to be any criminal charges against anybody at the hotel, because they seem to be, once the police arrived, very forthcoming. They were trying to help with the investigation. They gave them access to the room. They gave them, all the information that the police were asking, and tried to cooperate at that point.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Alexis, for coming on today. We really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me.
According to the Monroe County Sheriff's Office, Dylan Lamb is being held without bond. For Law and Crime, I'm Kennedy Walker.